Dr. Renuka Ramroop is attached to the University of Limpopo and is a researcher on the topic of natural learning, also known as unschooling. Qualified as a teacher, she taught English and drama and later provided teacher training. 17 years ago, she made the decision to home educate her two children following the natural learning approach. Renuka, what is natural learning?
Well, natural learning is really an approach that works on the premise that children can learn by themselves, that they don't need to be taught, that they don't need to have other people decide for them what they should learn and when they should learn it. So natural learning is really following the interest of the child and providing the space and opportunity and the freedom for the child to engage with the world, engage with life, engage with the people around them, and through that process of living, learn. Because learning is a natural process of life. From the minute we are born till the time we die, we are learning. And often, if you have to notice how little children learn, they are fully absorbed in what they are doing. Um, they're passionate about what they are doing. And as soon as they come to a certain age, which is regarded as a school-going age, that process is stopped. And it's a very powerful way of learning. And when we stop that process, we take away a very important aspect of who they are and how they learn.
Home educators often talk about different learning styles, a child being a visual learner or an auditory learner or a kinesthetic learner. Do children learn in different ways, and is there a best approach to learning?
With the natural learning approach, and if you look at the whole range of approaches that exist around home education with school and, even within the schooling, you have Montessori, you have Waldorf. I would not want to say that there is one best approach for somebody to learn, because every child is unique and learning is a unique and a personal experience. So I think it is it is very important for families and children to sort of decide what approach is the best for them. But taking it from a natural learning approach, um, it is a child who's given the freedom and the responsibility to determine what they want to learn and in terms of their own schedule of learning. When it comes to looking at the visual, the VAK that we talk about, there is of course a value in that. But for me, the problem would be if it becomes a way to box people and to label people that they can only learn in a certain way. If you look at it, we all have aspects of that in ourselves. So sometimes we are visual learners, we are auditory learners, we are kinesthetic learners. But some of us have sort of a leaning towards one way of doing it. The problem is that often we box people when they're very young before they've really developed their way of learning. Now, if you look at how children learn, you will see that they learn with their entire beings absorbed in that learning process. So they learn with all senses. It's like they become like sponges. They can just go and absorb everything that's in that learning environment. So yes, it is good to sort of have a good understanding of people, of your children. It's good to know the personality of the child, but I would be cautious in terms of boxing them in a certain way and sort of saying a certain approach is the only approach. It's sort of the problem we have with schooling, if you have to think about it, because with schooling, we are saying that there's only one approach. The approach that you go to school, and that's the only approach that children can learn. And as people in the home education sector, where we have a whole array of ways of doing it, we know that that is not the only way of doing it. So that would be my concern. The approach will be determined by the child, the personality of the child, what they like, and the family. It's a personal family individual decision that people need to make.
Renuka, what influence does teaching have on learning? Should a child receive instruction or should it all be self-discovery? Or is there a balance to maintain?
You know, with a natural learning approach, it is a child who determines their learning uh, journey. So they will, whatever they're interested in, the parent or, in the family, there will be activities or a family life that revolves around the child's interest. And sometimes that interest could last 3 months, sometimes it could last 3 years. It all depends on the child. And the parent will sort of work with the child around those interests and develop through the through the through life and through living. So learning can become quite incidental, if I may put it that way. It does not mean that it is not real. It is real. So authentic learning actually happens when the child is involved, when the experience of the child it's exploring, um, when meaning making becomes an insight phenomenon, if you understand what I'm saying. So whatever you're engaging with, that meaning must become an insight phenomenon for you. So the idea of where what you're doing, your practice has to sort of become internalized. And that is when authentic learning is actually taking place, when it's not imposed, when it's not learning for a certain time period or for a test or whatever. But generally, we see that learning, there are four requirements for learning, if I may put it. One is that instruction, um, before instruction, the first one should be that the child must have the desire to learn. So let's take reading, for example. If a child wants to learn to read, that is when the child's brain, body, spirit, everything is primed to learn to read. That may not be at 6 years old, which is when everybody wants a child to start reading. It might be at 4, it might be at 10, it might be at 12. But because we have a schedule in terms of saying this is when a child needs to read, then there's a whole imposition and a manipulation and an enforcement of learning to read. And that is when we can have all sorts of consequences around that enforced learning. So the desire to want to do something, to learn, is the first and the foremost thing that a child needs to show. And that desire will then be the sort of springboard for everything else that comes thereafter. The other thing is that the learner must be involved through exploration, through all senses. It shouldn't be a sort of, the traditional book teacher sort of method. The child should be involved completely with everything on all levels. Then the other thing is that instruction should be on demand. Because actually children are very competent to learn by themselves. We don't realize that, but they are very, very good at learning by themselves, at figuring things out by themselves. And it is often when we want to teach and we want to interfere in that process, we stop that learning process. We compromise it. We take away their ability to see how well they could have done it without us wanting to teach. Um, so if you find that when a child actually wants help, they will ask for it. And that is when the parent or the teacher needs to sort of come into the picture. It's when they are invited by the child. Say, can you help me? I would like to do this. Or the parent and child will be chatting about something, and out of that chatting comes up that, maybe we could try this and we could try that. But imposition and cutting off and imposing how you think the child should do it is generally one of the best ways to stop learning from happening. That is one of the things. And the fourth thing is that failure is never considered a bad thing. Failing at something is seen as a positive and a driving force for learning. So if you look at those four sort of, if you want to call it, requirements for learning, that will sort of give you an idea that the notion of teaching as we know it, the traditional notion of teaching as we know it, actually has no place for a child's learning trajectory. I mean, if you think about it, all people, we're looking at children now, but all people, with the best time that you learn the best learning process you've ever gone through is when you really want to do it, and everything about you is about doing that, and then your learning is it's meaningful, it's fun, it is empowering, and you enjoy the process. So if you look at a lot of adults, when they think about after they left school and probably their tertiary institutions, and then they start working, and then they pick up something that they really wanted to do, and then they reflect on that process of learning, and they realize that it actually follows exactly this process, that you want to do it, it's meaningful for you, and when you decide to do it, you put everything you have into doing it. So why do we not allow that process to happen from birth?
That's a very good question. When you mentioned now a child's ability to self-learn, self-study, I thought of the ease with which my son just adopts technology. He figures it out, and he's not scared to press a button, and I'm terrified. So, um,
Yeah.
yeah. And if I look at my younger nieces, the way they play house, how they copy their mom's behavior. And at the end of the session, they pack everything away, close the windows, lock the doors. And they weren't taught to do that. It was through
Yes.
observation.
Yeah. Incidentally, play is actually one of the only mediums of learning that children learn through play. And it's the example that you give about playing house. And that's also it also throws a light on the role of parents and family in the natural learning process. So the responsibility you have is that of a parent. So you never become a teacher in your home, you are a parent. But the home environment that you create, the discussions that you have, your availability as an adult to your child becomes very, very important. And as you said, children will mimic what adults are doing. That's their first way of learning, is through observing and mimicking what adults are doing. And remember, when children are little, all they want to do is be competent in an adult world. So that is why they never want to use the play tools. They want to use the real tools. They don't want to use the play utensils. They want to use the real, because they want to be. And through that wanting to be, their desire to be competent is so great. And in that desire to be competent, it's their learning, their passion for learning is so amazing to watch. So why do we want to stop it? That exact emotion that and spirit that children have when they are little, they take that through the rest of their lives as they grow up into teenagehood, into adulthood. The, they just keep that fundamental idea that they are free to choose, they have agency. That's a very important. All of us need that for us to thrive, adults, children, everybody. For us to thrive, we need to understand that we are freedom to choose, that we have agency, and we are empowered. Those are important things for us to thrive and flourish in our society. And those are the important qualities for a society to flourish in turn. So if these are such important values and such important competencies that we need to have, why do we want to take it away from children? We don't want to take it away from children. We want to create that space. We want to create an environment where they are free to be who they want to be. And we as parents and as other invested adults in that child's life, we are there to support and encourage that process. We are not there to take away, to stop, or to shame. We are there to encourage and support.
Renuka, your topic for your doctorate was on natural learning. What were some of the key aspects that your research showed?
Well, there was a lot, but I think some of the most exciting things that I found while doing this research was that there were so many people in South Africa who were doing it, whom I didn't know at that time when I started. I just knew a few people. And through what we call snowball technique, just the community just grew. So I got to know a lot more people who were doing following this approach. And I think for me, it was talking to the adult people who had gone through this process and looking at what they were doing and how they were negotiating their adult life and studying and, and just being adults, gone beyond the 18 years of what would traditionally be schooling years, and just listening to them and looking at how they negotiate the world, looking at their the sort of the power that they have as young people in terms of how they're looking at the world, how they interact with other people, and the diversity of experiences they were having. In terms of their studies and what they're doing in their world of work, and so we have people in the arts to people in the, who's doing science. So it was a wide range, and I think the people who had gone beyond that sort of young adult phase and who were people who are now working. That was also amazing. Some people were running their own businesses. Some people were working and sort of really had very, very good positions in their companies that started as apprentice in an apprenticeship program and then sort of worked their way up. And, one person I knew who was like the head of his division and was traveling all over the world. So, the possibilities are endless. And the amazing thing about everybody that I spoke to was that they remained very, very strong in terms of who they were as people, that they were strong individuals. They'd understood who they were and what they wanted to do. They didn't come across as people who were sort of lost and needed to find their way or anything like that. I think the other thing that was really, really interesting was to see how much of effort and passion they put into their chosen field. So it was like they decided to do this and it was all out. It was like seeing, children who are young and decide that they want to love dinosaurs and, they just go crazy. It was the same thing. And suddenly there you had adults, young adults in their chosen field, and the passion and the work and the insight they had about themselves and what they were doing, that was also pretty amazing. And for me, that was the cherry on the whole thing. So when you're a young parent and you're following the natural learning approach, you have doubts. You think, I wonder if this is going to work. I wonder, it's fine when they're little, we can all talk dinosaurs, but what happens when they get to 14 or 15? And, so we sort of have those doubts. And then you see this cohort of people who have gone through this experience and negotiating and navigating their world with aplomb. I mean, not that they don't have doubts and they don't have hang-ups or, they don't have obstacles, but the negotiation around those obstacles are also amazing. I mean, because they have so much more maturity compared to, I would say, an average child who's been to school, because they have lived life in this world. So they were not locked away for 12 years and now have to negotiate the real world. They have always been in the real world. So their transition from into going into sort of further studies and into the world of work is a lot easier for them, or that's what they feel. And then in their discussions with their peers, they also realize how wonderful natural learning actually is and what it had done for them. So I think also what was nice was to see young adults being really appreciative of the fact that their parents made that decision because it has helped them so much. So that was also nice to see.
That's really encouraging. We live in a world where you are constantly assessed or tested, and the whole school system is driven by that. How important is assessment, and how do you assess your child's growth within the natural approach?
If you think about being a parent from the time your child is born, you're always sort of noticing what they do, and they did that today, and last week they were able to only go up 3 steps on the jungle gym, and now they can go all the way up. So as a parent, you are always assessing your child. if I want, if you know, to use a word, but I use it cautiously, but you're always observing your child. You know your child better than anybody else because you spend time with your child. You are, I mean, you're the parent, you know your child. When we come to assessment that comes from the outside, okay, what we actually do is take away the psychological freedom and the psychological safety that children have in their learning development. And that also stops learning from actually happening. It's like a river that's flowing, and then you dam it. You make a dam, because in this dam you want to see how much of water you're collecting. So you stop the flow of learning. And in the natural learning approach, most parents, what they would do is that because it is so part of life, there is no sort of, how can I say, it's like you don't suddenly do something and then stop and assess. If you understand what I'm saying. You live life. You're watching your child grow, you're watching them thrive, you're a partner to their learning and living. So you are there, you're watching and you're assessing. You know when your child is not coping well with a certain aspect or whatever, you know that. And then you will find other ways to bring in certain things to help, to sort of help them, or in discussion with them, you would sort of, if, for example, if they really, really want to, I don't know, write well, then you can have a discussion and say, okay, you know, what do you want to do? And if they say, I really want to do this well, then how do we do it? Shall we go and get a book? Shall we, you know, do you want to access this? Do you want to get somebody to do it for you? So you have a discussion and then you implement it. Some children choose to have a tutor for a certain, for example, kids who want to do a musical instrument. My children, for example, they did a musical instrument and they wanted to have it go to someone who would teach them the musical instrument. And that's fine, that's their decision. And then within that tutoring, there's a certain dynamic that happens that's beyond the home environment. So there might be assessments there or whatever, but they have chosen to do that, and they take the responsibility for working in that manner with the person that, you know, whoever is tutoring them. I often advise or sort of recommend to parents that they keep a diary of their children, you know, and it doesn't have to be your traditional diary where you're writing and all of that. You could, you know, your snapshots, your video cameras, or whatever you want to use, your technology, or however you want to do it. But I always sort of recommend that you sort of keep some sort of writing, but more for yourself, not for anyone else. It's not for the department to come and see what you're doing. It's for you to see the process and to enjoy that process. Because if I have to ask you what your son did 3 months ago, you're not going to remember, let alone 5 years ago, you know. So if you keep a sort of a diary or some sort of a record or something, you have a nice, and you can see the flow, you can go back and you can, you know, look at it if that is what you're interested in. If it's not something that interests you, it's not a problem, because at the end of the day, it's not about what other people think. It's about your family, your children, what your child is doing and what's important for him or her. A lot of people make an issue about the assessment and natural learning, say, about how will we know? And the thing is, there are many ways to know. I mean, if a child wants to go into something, and okay, let me give an example of one particular person who's now around 18, and she decided that, you know what, she fell in love with physics by accident. She discovered physics, and she thought, oh, this is really, wow, this is like Star Wars, you know, real life. And it was like, oh, this is like amazing. Fell in love with it and spent a lot of time working on various courses, you know, through the internet, accessing whatever. And in herself, she does a lot of her own self-assessments. So she says, you know, I actually know this part, but I don't know that. So I need to go and do that. So actually the assessment comes from the person who's going through the process. So as a parent, you're also assessing, but okay, you don't sort of make it a sort of a labeling and a discouraging process. You have discussions with your child, but the child who's going through that learning process is constantly assessing themselves in terms of where they're doing, what they're doing, how well they're doing this, and they're very busy self-correcting. Because that's one of the things that we take away from children who go to school. We do not give them the opportunity to self-correct. Because a child who mixes the B and the D when they are 4 or 5 years old, okay, eventually will come to a point where they can self-correct and realize, oh, that's, I did that, that was so silly. I actually did that. It's actually the other way around. But when we stop that process around 4, when they're young and if they are sort of confusing their letters or whatever, we immediately think, oh, maybe they're dyslexic or something like that. So we are quick to label. But assessment happens all the time. The other possibility is that you can do what one can call a qualitative assessment. So basically, my study was a qualitative study. So basically, you talk to people, you interview them, you look at their records, you look at other works and whatever, and then you draw a conclusion to say where this person is at that time and place. So a qualitative research method is a proven, scientific, well-established method for research. There's no way why you cannot, as a parent or a child, if you ever need an assessment for whatever reason, there's no reason why you cannot maybe employ the same sort of methodologies and techniques as you would a qualitative. That's just one example. But I think for me, the most important thing is that the child and the parent knows where they are, what they're doing, what their shortcomings are, what they would like to do further. And you just know your child. But by providing that psychological safety, the psychological freedom, you allow a creative environment. And in that creative environment, there are many beautiful things that happen and many beautiful learnings that happen. And we just, as adults, we need to be open to that. We need to trust that. And we need to have faith that our children will learn what they need to learn when they want to learn, and they will be happy, successful people.
Yeah, it's quite a challenge that you're presenting. I think because we've grown up with the school system, so it is quite a mind shift.
Yes.
Just one thing you mentioned now in trusting your child. I also wonder limiting screen time, for example, because you need to, as you said, your home life, you need to provide an environment rich for learning. So you don't want to just plonk your child behind a screen and leave them there the whole day.
Yeah, the thing is that like I say, the home environment is a very important environment, and the experiences that you provide for your children also become important. So, for example, if I think about myself, there's certain things that we, as a family and personality, we did not do. So we would sort of realize that and make sure we sort of created or would expose our children to things that we would normally not do also, so that they didn't just only get our point of view or whatever. So we really tried to create a very open space for all sorts of things. So it wasn't like, it only had to be us and our view and our thing. So we often spoke to a lot of people, made efforts to do different things with the kids. And I think that's what parents generally do in any case, of course, the challenge for technology is there because, technology is it's a very seductive mode. It's a very seductive thing. Before you know it, you are taken into that world. And a lot of parents have a difficulty in sort of being able to sort of match their need to be a natural learning parent, where you allow, well, not allow, but you provide the space for children to be sort of self-determining and whatever, and then they spend a lot of time on technology, and then they start getting nervous, So I think Pam Laricia, I think she mentioned that sometimes as a parent, and parents do this naturally in any case, you are in tune with your kids. So sometimes you know when you need to offer something else. So it's, for example, if you see that a child is spending a lot of time on a screen, what she suggests is that sometimes you need to go and very gently and kindly say, oh, you know, let's go and do this, or create another activity that can take them away from that. So you're, like I say, the role of parent in a natural learning home is a very, it's a very, I wouldn't want to say that, because I had one parent in the study felt that the role of the parent was so overwhelming that she actually stopped natural learning. So I don't want to sort of create an atmosphere where you are like completely absorbed. You just do what parents normally do, but you need to be in tune with your kids in terms of how you can take them away from certain activities, provide different activities. So it's about providing a balanced plate of activities for them, so that they have many many areas that they can go into. Because sometimes everyone has a default mode, right? So it's like, if you really don't know what you need to do now, okay, what is your default mode? You know, then you go and pick up your default mode. And for a lot of people now, technology has become that default. So that's where you go to. The problem, of course, comes in when that's all you're doing. But there are people who follow the natural learning method and they won't stop that process either. So it's not about stopping a process, it's about understanding a process. It's about understanding your child. It's about understanding why they want to do what they are doing. It's about presenting them with other activities, family activities, you know, sporting activities, being able to present that, and hopefully the child will engage and take it on. So yes, it is quite a mind shift in terms of parenting, in terms of how you see your child. And it's not easy. Parenting is not an easy task. You know, it requires a lot of time and effort and a lot of reflection. And sometimes you do things and then, you know, 3 days later you think, why did I do that? Why did I say that? You know, so that's, and we're all going through this together. But in a natural learning home, a parent and a child become partners to their learning and their living. So it's not a separation. You become partners to how you're doing it. And for a parent, it's also a very liberating experience, where you are not sort of the master in the house, you know. Yeah, and that you allow that you create the space for responsibility. So those things are also important, but there's a lot of philosophy around it. It's about empowering the parent, empowering the child, and even, and you know, of course, in the end result, or the bigger goal, is creating a society where we don't have people who are walking around with a lot of shame and a lot of hurt and anger because they were not part of the 5% who were considered successful, you know. So yeah, I hope I'm not rambling.
Renuka, your passion shines through, and I thank you for your time and for sharing your knowledge. You've definitely touched aspects of my heart, and you've given plenty to think about.